Welcome to Where is Truth? We're so glad that you have joined us. My name is Norm Peckham, and I have with me Dr. Ariel Roth. We're so glad that you can be here with us once again. We're going to study a great problem. What do you mean, a great problem?
Well, this is a great problem that science has. Science has rejected God. Let's look into the details of this. In the Bible, God is the creator, and a text in Job 38:4, raises an interesting question. God is asking here, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding."
That's going to make you feel pretty small pretty quick.
Yes, but God is the creator, and He's the creator throughout the whole Bible.
Yes.
Now, in contrast to that, Richard Lewontin at Harvard wrote a book review in which he made this statement: materialism is absolute. He's speaking of science here. For we cannot allow a divine foot in the door.
Materialism absolute.
Yes, science will not allow God to even put his foot in the door. It has to be absolute.
Now they can't measure and feel and touch God. Material things they can. So are they saying we have to speculate if we let God in and we won't do that?
Well, this is a problem. They will speculate about all kinds of things except God. For instance, there's a scientific article that says, well, life arose on Earth because some aliens from outer planets came to Earth and they left some garbage here. It's called the garbage theory. And that garbage, there were some germs of life, and that's the way life started on Earth. This is okay. You don't include God in the picture in that model. There's another idea that organisms have existed for hundreds of millions of years before we can find them in the fossil record according to evolutionary reckoning. That's okay. You can speculate that way. That's fine.
But there's no more data for that than there is for God.
No. There's a lot more data for God.
Yes.
But no, it seems to be a definite bias against God. You can speculate in science, but you cannot include God in that speculation. Okay. And, science has posted a do not enter sign as far as God is concerned right now. You don't find God mentioned in scientific textbooks. You don't find it mentioned in scientific journals and so on. And if you do mention it sometimes, it causes quite a furor at times because, no, if you're a scientist, you don't deal with religion type of thing. There are many problems with the practice of science, and we're going to consider some of them here.
But here it says, science is no longer an open search for truth, following the data of nature wherever it may lead. So they're not. Why are they not following the data? Isn't that what they claim to do?
Well, this is a bias that science has. It's an anti-religious bias. It's the only way we can explain it, because they're willing to speculate about all kinds of things, but not God.
Okay, but how do they confuse data and interpretation?
Well, this is very easy to do, because as you try and interpret things, pretty soon you start believing in your interpretation, and you think your interpretation is true. And this has occurred for the general theory of evolution, for instance. Evolution is often presented in scientific textbooks and journals and so on as a fact. It's accepted. It's not discussed. I mean, this is the final word.
But go ahead.
That's an interpretation, though.
Yeah, that's kind of. I think maybe that's kind of like my blocks here.
Yeah.
I made some blocks, and if I were to find a pile of bones or a pile of blocks and bring them to you in a sack and say, would you put these in order? And you might put them in an order, something like this, because they're ordered on size. Now, if you believed, and I told you it was true, and we believed, that big blocks come from little blocks, then when you ordered them, you would not only have them in this order, but you would say, see, this order is evidence for the fact that big ones come from little ones. But if I were to bring my bandsaw down here and start working this thing through the saw, you discover that little blocks came from big blocks. And if you believed that, if you thought that was true, and then you ordered the blocks, you'd have them in exactly the same order, but you'd start at the other direction. And then you'd say, Norm, see, little blocks do come from big blocks. Well, what if through some metaphysical belief in the electromagnetic visible spectrum and invisible spectrum, that was the most important thing, then you might believe that that spectrum has an effect on how things are made, and you might order them according to red, blue, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, the colors of the rainbow. And now we'd have them ordered in a different way based on the belief system that we have when we come to it. So the blocks or the bones don't say how they came. We put them in an order and then we say, see, they fit my order. They fit my belief system.
This illustrates just what we're talking about here, that the blocks are the facts. That's the data. You gave several interpretations here. When we come to the controversy between the Bible and science, we can say, well, the organisms are the data. Evolution is an interpretation. Creation is another interpretation. And you should not confuse those interpretations with the facts.
Which are the blocks.
Which are the blocks. And on the basis of your data, you can draw certain conclusions, and this is part of science, and we like to do this. And so, but we need to be careful to not present as fact that which is an interpretation.
Yes.
And scientists recognize this, although they don't always practice it at all.
Is that belief system that I was talking about, is another word for that a paradigm?
Yeah, definitely, and we'll get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
There is the scientific community in analyzing this thing has talked about historical science, which is not the science of historians. This is a term that applies to interpreting scientific data that is not so solid. Evolution would be an example of this because it deals with the past. You can't do it. You can't perform the experiments to repeat it. Creation would be the same thing, type of thing. On the other hand, we have experimental science, where you can go in the laboratory, you repeat the thing, and so on. This is considered more solid science. So science does recognize this problem to a certain extent, but often data and interpretations are mixed up. Then coming to paradigms that you mentioned, the paradigms are a very interesting feature, and Thomas Kuhn, in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, and so on, outlined how often science works under these broad concepts we call paradigms. They're big ideas, like the idea that the continents move around is a paradigm. The idea that they don't move around was a paradigm before the new paradigm of movement was accepted. A paradigm is usually accepted as true, and it's not questioned. And you kind of fit your data into it, and if everybody agrees to it, even though it may not be true, it's accepted.
With the flat Earth, is that a paradigm?
Yeah, it would be a flat Earth. It would be a paradigm, but it's never been a very popular one. It wasn't true. and you know, and paradigms can be right or wrong. For instance, a long time ago, we used to think that spontaneous generation was accepted, you know, and then there was a big battle about spontaneous generation, and science decided, well, no, there isn't spontaneous generation. Then evolution came into the right after that, and spontaneous generation did occur once, but it doesn't occur now. So we have this peculiar interpretation. But this is how paradigms work. They dominate for a long time. People accept them as truth, but really they aren't always correct. Here's an example of how a paradigm has affected interpretations. Many scientists now tend to believe that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And we have an example here of a fossil that was interpreted in that paradigm, but it turned out to be not correct. This fossil was put on display by the National Geographic Society in 1999 as a big press conference, big announcement. Here we have an intermediate between birds and a dinosaur. And so this big meeting there, and scientists were telling them, the people and so on, we're looking at the first dinosaur capable of flying. It's kind of overwhelming, because this was intermediate between a dinosaur and a bird. What happened is that Stephen Zerkis from the Blinding Dinosaur Museum went to Tucson at this great display of fossils they have every year there and so on, and he saw this fossil, and he immediately detected that this was very important, because it was a bird, but it had the tail of a dinosaur. And so he paid $80,000 for it, and called up a specialist, Philip Curie, the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Canada, and they decide, National Geographic decide, we're going to make a big announcement of this, and so keep quiet about it. The scientists studied it, and then the announcement came forth. National Geographic published it, but then just a few days after the announcement, some of the scientists who thought birds did not come from dinosaurs,
they took another look at this.
Took another look at this thing and said, hey, look at all these problems here you have. And there's something wrong with this fossil. And the problem, you can see a little bit of the problems. It was put together using 88 different parts. It had been glued together carefully. At least there were 88 broken parts in the thing and so on. The head of the bird is up at the left-hand corner. The tail is the red arrow. You see the two yellow arrows there. They represent the feet. And one reflects the other one. They just use one foot to make both of them.
A mirror image.
The mirror image that you get in the counter slab when you make a fossil, when a fossil is made. Okay. So, and the blue arrows show you the long bones again. The one leg was used to make both legs on this, and the tail is not well attached. Well, one of the scientists, Xing Zhu, who had studied this, and so he went back to China to look where this originated from and so on, and he found the tail, the other part of the tail, and it was attached to a dinosaur. So here was a bird, and they had attached this tail to that. And these folks were interested in suggesting that, dinosaurs were the originators of birds.
So they literally fabricated this thing?
It had been fabricated. Not the scientists didn't do it, okay? But the scientists were fooled by it. And so on, because they had this dominant paradigm that they were trying to prove that birds came from dinosaurs. So
it fit the model.
It fit the model. It fit the model very well. That's what it was involved.
Well, what's the third problem? Exclusiveness in science. What does that mean?
Well, science is highly successful. And many scientists feel that science is the best way to arrive at truth. Other areas are inferior, and so they tend to ignore them. And so they just draw conclusions on the basis of what they can see and so on, and tend to ignore any reality beyond what they can see, or at least interpret very closely to the data they have and so on.
That sounds like kind of a not invented here mentality. If we don't see it nor organize it, it isn't true.
Right. But, you know, things like art, science will not pay that much attention to it. Religion,
Throw it out.
So on. They're quite sure that their method is the best and so on. And because of this, because they have excluded other areas, science has this limited outlook, which comes back a little bit to they won't allow God in the picture, which we mentioned before, and so on. Keep in mind, science is highly successful in some areas, but it has adopted this materialistic philosophy, and other areas are not allowed. Reality is reduced down to mechanistic ideas of matter and motion. Your secularism dominates. God is not allowed in the picture, and so are many other areas. Science tends to be exclusive because it thinks it's good, and science is good to a certain extent, but it needs to open its doors so that other ideas are allowed into the picture.
Is science really secular? Are they true to the secular, or does it get a little bit almost where the arguments become almost religious?
Well, it depends on how you want to define religion. Certainly there seems to be some religious fervor to a certain extent in science's materialistic stance. Yeah. Famous Harvard evolutionist Stephen Gould has made this statement about intelligent design, which is, you know, just suggesting some kind of God. He says it's a fallacy that is historically moth-eaten.
Pretty strong language.
Yeah. Nobel laureate Francis Crick warns, he said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. It's hard to think there isn't a secular agenda here. Secularism is strong in science. This affects the scientific literature, very much so. The terminology used is secular. For instance, the term chemical evolution is used to explain the origin of life, and so as soon as you see that, without it's assuming it's true, oftentimes it's in the scientific literature and so on, not pointing out that this is an interpretation, not a fact. And so the literature is very much biased, again, because science has this rather closed view of things. But strangely, as we mentioned earlier a long time, 4 out of 10 scientists believe in God that answers their prayers. Paradoxically, they will not publish about God or in their textbooks or in their scientific papers because, well, to be a scientist, you just don't do that.
And those who have tried, some of them have lost their jobs at the university.
Absolutely. So, but science has trapped itself into a secular box. This is very unfortunate. It won't allow God in the interpretations, even though a lot of data points towards God. It turns out that, as presently practiced, science is the odd combination of the study of nature and a secular philosophy that rules God out. You can exclude God by definition, but that does not work well if God exists. Part of truth is being excluded here, at least the possibility of that truth is being excluded by science, by this rather closed attitude that they have. And I said there's evidence for God. You know, we've talked about this in the past, so let me just review some of the main points. Organization of matter, for instance. Why does a proton have a mass that, if it varied by 1 part of 1,000, we wouldn't have the atoms that we have to make the elements and all the chemicals and living matter and so on. Precision of the forces of physics, incredible. These forces work exactly in the right realm. They have to be exactly the right force. In the case of gravity and electromagnetic force, they have to be within 1 part out of 10 to the 40th power. That's how accurate they have to be. I mean, could this all happen by chance? No, this is data that suggests a God.
Scientific data.
Yes, scientific
That's
data,
right.
yes. Origin of life, this is the most difficult problem that evolution faces, you know. The simplest life we know of is so complex. How could it just come about? Very serious problem. If you have God, intelligent God doing so on, your problem is solved. The complexity of biological systems, you know, the autofocus system of your eye, for instance, has various parts. That's not going to be able to, that's not going to evolve or be able to invoke natural selection because natural selection would tend to destroy these various parts of the system until the whole system works. Then we've got the time, totally inadequate for the improbabilities of evolution. I mean, just to make one protein molecule, it would take 10 to the 23rd power years to do it. Well, you know, that's 10 billion times too long a time compared to the age of the Earth.
As defined by them.
As defined by them, the 5 billion years,
right.
Defined by them type of thing. So you know, and we can go on here with fossils do not reflect gradual evolution, not at all. You know, you have most all your animal phyla appear in 2% of their geologic time scale, and we think this is the flood, the lower seas at the flood and so on. That data fits so much better with the Bible than it does with the scientific interpretation. And then we have the question of the mind. Certain things of our mind you don't find in matter. Science can study matter, forces, and this and so on, but you don't find in there characteristics that we know that exist, such as our consciousness, our conscience, our integrity, our morality. These are things beyond science.
So you've listed 7 major categories of scientific data that are very hard to fit into the current scientific model, but fit well within the idea of God.
Yes.
Can you give us some of your references for further study?
I have written a book about this titled Science Discovers God. Here's a picture of this and so on. This discusses that point very well. And it's published by the Review and Herald, Autumn House Publishing, imprint of the Review and Herald and so on. But if you're interested in the flood, which is part of this issue and so on, this book deals more with the flood origins, linking science and scripture and so on. And this book has been published in 16 languages.
Scientists really are going to have a hard time ignoring the evidence for God if they're honest with the scientific data.
Right. But can they ignore it? They do it right now.
Yes.
We will not allow a divine foot in the door, as Lewington said.
As Lewington said.
And this is a very serious problem. Now scientists exclude God largely because of personal and sociological factors that influence science, not because of the scientific data.
The Bible predicted this.
Yes, that's very interesting.
Predicted it in 2 Peter 3, verses 3 to 6. Let me read it. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they are willingly ignorant of that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. In the last days, they would ignore the Creator, and they would ignore the flood.
That's right, and we see the fulfillment of that before us right now, of course, where we've got evolution to take the place of the Creator, and we've got these long geologic ages to take the place of the flood.
an absolute biblical fulfillment of prophecy.
It's a very remarkable prophecy. It tells you the Bible is no ordinary book.
That's right. Well, in conclusion, either there is a God or there isn't one. We need to look at the data, all of the data, and interpret it from as many ways as we can and try to make a decision. Either there was a universe that was designed by God or there wasn't. More of the same. But more recently, the scientific community has restricted its outlook and rejected God as an explanation for nature. In this sense, science is in trouble. The scientific data, when looked at as we have examined it, leaves us with a near compulsion to believe in God. We have to stretch a lot of things. We're so glad that you have been with us. It's been a real pleasure, and we trust that you will be able to expand your horizons, look beyond the things that are taught to you in some places, but never give up your search for where is truth. If you would like additional free information about these discussions, there is a PowerPoint resource available on the Internet that covers many more details than could be provided in this lecture series. The resource is titled The Bible and Science and is available at scienceandscriptures.com. Be sure to add an S at the end of the word Scriptures to get to the right web page. The Bible and Science resource follows the same sequence of topics as the Where is Truth series, but it is divided into 17 separate discussions instead of the 14 videos of the Where is Truth series. The title of the discussions, an introductory outline, and an index will lead you to the topics you want. The Bible and Science discussions served as the resource for the Where is Truth videos.